not another problem for Mercedes to potentially deal with, something that's fueling plenty of debate, as well as fueling their cars and the cars of 6 other drivers. The compression ratio saga has reached a temporary conclusion. Mercedes' engine is legal under the current measurement method, and the revised compliance checks won't apply until after the summer break. But before Australia, there's another race against time, and it's happening with their title sponsors, Petronas. And there is now a race against time for their fuel supply to be formally approved by Formula One before the opening race kicks off in just over 2 weeks' time. There is a real concern that they might not be able to get their ideal specification fuel done in time, and therefore they could be leaving performance on the table. And considering that the new compression measurements will be not taking place until the Dutch Grand Prix, the 13 races where Mercedes can run their engine without any worries, and they are in a race against time here as well, so it's not great for anyone that's racing with Mercedes. They just can't catch a break, can they? Enough to give their rivals that little bit of an extra edge. Sure, it may be only 1 or 2 tenths, but when you take a look at that really tricked out little flap next to the exhaust and around the diffuser that Ferrari's had, that's an extra 2 tenths, so it all adds up, folks. This does seem rather odd given that Petronas has plenty of experience with Formula One, going as far back as the mid-90s with Sauber. They have been around for nigh on 30 years at this point. But things have changed and gotten a little bit more complicated than back in the day, than just making a simple blend that hits F1's technical specs. You send a sample of it to the FIA's linked labs to pass or fail it, and then you're all set. According to motorsport.com, this process between them sending off the supplier and then getting the green light is about 2 to 3 weeks. No biggie, absolutely fine. However, in 2026, there are a few more checks and balances in place that you have to hit the accreditation of having sustainable fuel, and it has to be advanced sustainable fuel. This, my friend, has to be approved by somebody not from the FIA necessarily, but a middleman. Somebody who could provide that third-party verification. And given all of the news regarding third-party verification at this time, that's never a good thing, isn't it? It's just extra red tape and extra bureaucracy. This coming from Zemo Partnership. They're running the Sustainable Racing Fuel Assurance Scheme for F1, assessing where every component of said fuel came from, and whether the sustainability claims checks out. In short, the sport's made the job of approving car use somebody else's problem. The fuel can be chemically perfect and perform exactly as intended in the engine and still not be cleared to race because the sustainability certificate hasn't been issued yet. But they just got their timings wrong, and it's now left Mercedes and McLaren and Alpine and Williams heading towards another example of squeaky bum time. Petronas thought, oh, we'll be absolutely fine. This will only take a few weeks like it was before. Oh, no, it's not taking... Oh, no. Oh, dear. Oh, Toto's going to kill us. And that might explain why, for the shakedown and the 2 Bahraini tests, teams did not necessarily have to have homologated fuel ready to go to use for those particular outings. They could use non-compliant fuels. They have ready for 2026, but it hasn't been formally approved yet, just to prevent costs absolutely spiralling to try and get that blessed certificate. Just that means you can get some data on the board, and then if you do get the certificate in time for the season, then everything's absolutely gravy. Well, you might be thinking, well, if the team knows that their fuel is okay, it came from the right sources, and all they need to have is that certificate, then what's the problem, Nor? Well, it's another variable, you see, where there wasn't a variable before. You could just send a sample to the FIA, they'll look at it, and then you'd be fine. You could then just go through the routine as had done for many decades. Now, there is someone else involved, and with somebody else involved, it makes that feedback loop that little bit longer, and Formula One works on very, very tight deadlines, and this is a very, very tight situation for Petronas. Also, with testing, you want to be sure that the juice that you're actually using is the one you're actually going to be using for the entire season, to try and build up that confidence and the synergy with the car. And as we've seen with Aston Martin, they need every single bit of confidence that they can get right now, and the confidence level of that team at this precise time is very close to 0, or even in the negative. If a team has to use a different fuel for the test, knowing they'll have a different one for Melbourne, or vice versa, it'll be like them rehearsing to perform at a concert on a piano, and then arriving on the stage, ready to go, feeling like you've got everything prepared. What do you get on there? It's a xylophone. Okay, it's kind of similar to a piano, and with these particular engines and the way the battery is 50-50 with the combustion engine, fuel could be a really big personality trait, which would then go on to explain all of the various differences for people to get to that original certification. It may dictate certain elements of the way the combustion engine operates and how the power is delivered to the gearbox and the rear end. You want it fully optimized and something you know and trust. Nobody's going to admit that they lost 2/10 because of the fuel blend, but everyone in the paddock would surely know that a small change could potentially lose you points. And indeed, what makes this more alarming is that Petronas supplies over a third of the grid their fuel supply, including their besties Mercedes. And based over the last couple of months, they've been a team that's been constantly under the microscope, and now they're under the microscope again by proxy, as well as their customers. It just never ends, does it? First, Mercedes insist that their power units compression ratios are legal, that the FIA held their hand throughout its development and gave them the all clear throughout all of that. And then after all of that rigmarole, the FIA bends over to all of the pressure and the lobbying from their rivals as well as the fans who were successfully riled up over something that was actually quite innovative, but then scared away again, into a compromise. You'll get a few months of this good time, Mercedes, but you will have to consider that we will have new tests. You may have passed it at temperature, but we are going to make sure you are doing that time and time again. All before August the 1st and all before the Dutch Grand Prix, when this new rule and temperature check will be in effect. By the way, I will be going to the Dutch Grand Prix, so if you see me around Zandvoort, do come up and say hi. But hey, at least Mercedes will be fine for Albert Park. There won't be any protests regarding the engine compression ratios because there is a compromise. Their rivals have sort of gotten their way for the long-term development of Formula One, right? So can we just relax about that? We don't have to worry about the starts because they turned out to be okay in testing, so can we please just focus on the racing? I think Mercedes would like that, but Mercedes aren't out of the woods yet. It'll be like the technical directors for the Flex Wings last year all over again, and then it's a mid-season change which could easily see a 2-act display for the championship. And what's wild to me is that compression story and the fuel story, they sort of have something in common in to do with how things are measured. As in, we all know about the engine side, but the fuel side, the way it's evaluated by somebody not by the FIA to make sure it checks out as being sustainable, that is an extra hurdle the teams are having to deal with, and some have been able to deal with it better than others. Petronas, they've really been caught napping here. But maybe in both of these circumstances, they are just hiccups and symptoms of probably one of the biggest sweeps of technical and regulation changes in the sport's history. There were bound to be some things that might have come up as a concern or a loophole, or an innovative that might be seen as cheeky, and just things that were just straight up unforeseen. These being just a couple of examples. I'm sure there will be more. In this case, it's definitions becoming weapons, and the team, including the teams by association, their customers, are being dragged into the spotlight again. It leaves us with the belief that Mercedes are cursed, or, if you're so inclined, cheaters. But the reality is that Mercedes is one of the biggest ecosystems in F1, and big ecosystems attract scrutiny and chaos, especially with all of the chatter over the last couple of years that they're expected to be the best team in 2026, even though other teams have shown that they've got some aces up their sleeve too. And what doesn't help Petronas out is that their fellow fuel suppliers, Shell, BP, and most recently ExxonMobil, have reportedly received approval for their blends, according to GP Blog. This suggests that at least 6 teams may already have clearance to run their prime time product. As for Aramco's lot, we haven't had full confirmation yet. We don't know what kind of juice Honda is running in that Aston Martin, although admittedly, they might be wanting to blame Honda, but Aston should really look at that gearbox now you actually think about it. I don't really think much thoughts about them because, well, they have plenty of experience with synthetic fuels because they've been supplying Formula 2 and Formula 3 since the beginning of last year. I'm pretty sure they've got a good handle on what's required from them, so I'm not too worried about them. Petronas, though, there is a very big question mark here, and they need to fill this out in the next couple of weeks, or else Mercedes, McLaren, Alpine, Williams, all 4 teams may have to run, less nice juice. And it's not been an easy process either. We managed to get a bit of insight via an Autosport article from ExxonMobil themselves. Their rep Katie Howell describing the whole ordeal as a staggering engineering challenge, but she claims that theirs is blended, drummed and ready to go, to be used in the 2 Red Bull-backed cars. Granted, we don't have a list of approved suppliers from the FIA themselves, which would be ideal here, but it suggests that whilst this process has been a noodle scratcher for suppliers to overcome, it's not proven to be a universal crisis, so it might have potentially caught Petronas out here, and we haven't heard any confirmation or denial from them or Mercedes. There's been absolute silence. And this isn't ideal for Mercedes, who want to telegraph a team who's ready to go and reckon they've sussed out the regulations for this year, and that they managed to run a tight ship and managed to get an idea that energy management and systems will be the ticket to winning championships, and they're finally out of their wilderness years after completely ballsing up ground effect and reeling from the beginnings of the cost cap. They are a much leaner organization right now. They want to give this a go. They might get that green flag from Zemo eventually, but it's very clear that if a supplier gets the green light early and that the teams can take all of this into account, whatever testing they can actually do, if it's all ready to use and ready to race and ready to test, it gives them clues and certainty as to what their car can actually do. If a team doesn't have that, as in Mercedes might have something that they think works with their car, but if they can't use it for a race or two, then it might not provide them the good baseline to then develop their upgrades going forward. It would mean that their data from Melbourne and Shanghai might be relatively useless or suboptimal. That's a real performance tax right there, and it will really sting for any team wishing to make a statement, and for Mercedes themselves. They have only got half a dozen races to make the most of this advantage they may have been able to accrue with the compression limit. And also, if they are not using an ideal fuel, the efficiencies they may gain from that compression might be cancelled out. It kind of reminds me of the situation with Top Gear. You know, you have the 3 cheap cars and then the backup car that nobody wants to be in, but you might not have any choice but to do so anyway. Yeah, I think Mercedes is very much looking at that and thinking, oh god, do we really want to be in that? It just reminds me of Top Gear. And it might lead to teams looking slightly clumsy or slightly cautious because, yeah, that fuel may work with their engine, but if it becomes very particular or very fussy, it could lead to the engine sustaining some damage or going bang, or running out of fuel much more than you would have expected. You know, lifting and coasting. But for Mercedes in the long term, this isn't too bad. They probably would love to get any titles in 2026 to make a true statement and to flirt to the likes of Max Verstappen. They are thinking about long-term competitiveness. But for their customers, this is not great. This is something that may hit them harder because they don't have the same ecosystem as Mercedes. They rely on the Mercedes powertrain to provide them extra lift. That's why Alpine came on board in the first place. They will be affected more by this delay and this uncertainty. They will be affected more by this confusion, the delay, the uncertainty. They are basically hostages here, these 3 customers. They've got their own programs to run, their own rivals, their own challenges to try and understand before Melbourne. They are completely on a different pathway to Mercedes, who are hoping to take it to Red Bull and Ferrari and take a title. Whereas those other teams, well, they're just thinking about having a good start to the year and having something to build. McLaren just wants to try and defend their title as best as they can, whereas Alpine and Williams, they just don't want to be glued to the back. What I'm trying to say is that fuel has now become a logistics problem. What F1's partner Zemo does in this new era is employ batch approval with independent verification. Batch approval means, basically, you can't just provide a unique sample or the concept of one on Blueprint and be on your way. You need to have the actual fuel you're going to use ready to test in batches. So you've got to get on with all of the rigmarole of creating tanks, refining, testing, and shipping a lot earlier now. F1 teams love operating on razor-thin margins for efficiency's sake. Introduce bureaucracy at this critical moment, and those margins could become liabilities. That's why the FIA did the teams a solid in Bahrain and Barcelona, like I mentioned earlier. But that said solid may have cost the teams extra anyway, because they may have to do extra work and extra calibration to ensure that if indeed they have to use a non-compliant fuel or an FIA-certified government-issued fuel, it would actually give them something that gives them a semblance of performance that the engine will actually run with and not have a temper tantrum over. So I don't think really anybody won out, really, unless Shell, BP and ExxonMobil got their certification way before Petronas or even before Aramco. And there is indeed a temporary fuel that can be used, according to motorsport.com, where one of these stories broke, that if a team didn't have an approved fuel ready to go for the season itself, they could lean on a potential supply from a supplier that was approved by the FIA and Zemo. Sure, it means the teams wouldn't be at risk from not competing at all, but it would mean their performance would be compromised. The engine may tolerate it, but Red Bull, Ferrari, whose engines have been approved, McLaren's and Mercedes rivals, they've got their final blend in the can and the car. They can lean on the car more and its fuel and get the full picture, whereas anyone powered by Mercedes high-performance powertrains, they may not have the ideal luxury of getting all of that performance and potential. And there's another angle to discuss too, because as we've said time and time again, energy management is going to be crucial in 2026. It's on the lips of every single driver. And whilst the second test has shown us in various elements and various sections that the teams are getting a handle on it and the drivers are able to push that a little bit more, it is certainly a formula which is different to what we've had in 2025. There are going to be things that teams did not expect to have to endure, and in this case, extra outside interference when it comes to the very thing that powers the car. But yes, the energy management side, you really need to get it right, or else you're going to have a terrible quali run, or you're going to lead to some really bad inefficiencies in the race. And as the test also showed, if you don't get your deployment right, you might want to overtake a car. You may have straight mode, you might have overtake, but if you run out of power right at the end of the straight and the other person doesn't, and then they actually run out of power, you'd basically just be left as a sitting duck, or maybe both of you. You wouldn't get the overtake converted. So the teams have to learn how to use it correctly, which is why this is a thing called testing. We really should not condemn the season of regulations just yet. Give these teams and drivers some time to bed themselves in, get their eye in, for Bernie Collins' sake. And yes, the fuel does come back into it, because if the ignition doesn't go off properly, or as the team expected with their blend that they were thinking they're going to use, it could lead to inefficiencies, especially when it comes to deployment, because you really need to get the balance between the combustion and the electrical side of the powertrain done correctly. If you haven't got the right juice to go racing, then, well, what good is it? It doesn't count for toffee. I don't think this aspect has really been talked about enough. We've been talking about the battery, we've been talking about the aero, but the fuel? That is really, really important. And I'm not blaming Petronas here, or at least not entirely. I don't think they really expected the massive impact that all of this third-party checking would actually do to their workflow and the feedback loop, and it's just very clear that they really should have just kept it between the supplier and the FIA, and things just ran absolutely smoothly. Now there's this extra guy that nobody really knows. They don't know the intricacies of what they're looking for. They just have to tick all of the boxes in a way that doesn't necessarily mean that any science has been sustained at all. They just have to make sure that the wording is correct and that it is actually sustainable. And the first year of any scheme that comes out is going to show these glaring issues. I don't expect Petronas or any of the other suppliers to fall into this issue for next year when things are tweaked, the power units are slightly different, they're more optimized, and the fuel is equally optimized. They will have baked into all of the workflows that, yeah, these guys are going to be extra meticulous in not a good way. And I think F1's drifting into a situation where the fastest teams aren't necessarily the ones on the track, but mainly they are the fastest to make everything absolutely compliant and above board. Performance, legal and audit departments, they really become strange bedfellows at the moment with these new rules. They have to be first in getting the right kind of paperwork signed off, and whilst ensuring that costs don't go through the roof and their car being the best on the track. Sure, this will ease in time, but it's been a very long, winding road getting here, hasn't it? And that brings us back to Mercedes. They've been navigating a hell of a lot of stress after coming out the other side of their wilderness years. One is competitive suspicion, one is normal preseason reliability noise, and this one is another around fuel homologation and the bottlenecks it comes with, which is a new kind of risk that hits Mercedes harder because they're attached to 3 customers. That's why we're talking about it. So if you put all of that together, the clear lightning rod of 2026 is very much Mercedes. We all thought that Red Bull would have been the laughingstock of 2026. Well, they've actually come out better than expected. We all thought Ferrari was going to be an absolute joke and that Lewis would retire and Charles Leclerc would abandon the team and go to Aston Martin. Well, based on what's happening with the Scuderia at the moment, fat chance either of that will happen. I think Oliver Bear might have to endure another season at Haas, quite frankly. And Esteban Ocon? Well, you better be careful of Jack Doohan or maybe even Rafa Kamara. But I think the more interesting argument is that they are the perceived favourites, so they are the perceived target, as in you don't want them to dominate like they did before, because we all remember the time when Mercedes got the rules absolutely spot on. They were imperious for 8 consecutive constructors battles. Seriously. People don't want that. Formula 1 doesn't want that. They want to at least the teams ensure that Mercedes don't have a clear advantage. That means they can be competitive and win races, is that there's an element of jeopardy here. It doesn't matter if George Russell or Kimi Antonelli wins the title. As long as it was a close fight, that's what people care about. We all thought that last year would have just been Lando's for the taking or Oscars for the taking. No. Max Verstappen and Red Bull gave us a show. That saved the season from turning into absolute theatre. It saved us all from having to just suffer the indignation of the world champion hotline. At least Max got 2 points from stopping that hotline from existing. And also, I think you'll agree with me, you love the variety of all the different cars that we are seeing. Ferrari's tricked out new rear wing, Audi's side pods, which look really reminiscent to early 90s Ferraris. We don't want a situation where Mercedes have the ultimate example and then everybody copies them. Like how the RB18 of 2022, the last big reg change, everyone went to copy Red Bull. It stifled innovation because we just chased the ultimate solution. Right now, there's a lot of jeopardy on uncertainty, and I like that. But yeah, any hint of an advantage, it just becomes a political event. And thanks to Autosport's reporting on ExxonMobil's lot regarding daily communications, it just shows how intense the technical partnerships have become. Fuel suppliers used to be branding with benefits, but now they've been even more of a part of the furniture for teams than ever. Almost like a fully fledged department. You can even see how Shell talks about their 2026 fuel being 4 years in the making, after the 2022 spec fluids came into place alongside the engine freeze and there was little to do. So they undertook, as they said, a long-term engineering product. But it is safe to say that Mercedes survived the engine argument by making it to the start of the year, with the engine declared legal under the current regulations. There won't be any protests from the teams or the governing body that will ruin the racing in Australia. It may be absolute chaos with the starts, there may be chaos because we have so many unknowns, but at least we won't be stuck in the stewards' room with loads of protests that are very distinctly off the track. We won't be dealing with that at least. Yeah, the FIA might come out with some new regulations and test measurements in August, but that's like 6 months away, man. We can at least make the most of this right now and see whether or not Mercedes are the hot ticket, or maybe this was all indeed a lot of hot air and Red Bull turn out to be the favourites, or maybe even Ferrari. But at least for George and Kimi, they can at least try and build a strong foundation for a championship challenge amidst the protests, but with this fuel providing a suboptimal solution potentially, it's not the greatest of starts now, is it? Because this fuel needs third-party assurance and a certification that the FIA doesn't really have much authority over. Zemo has to basically say, are you sure this is compliant? Is this actually eco-friendly? Is this sustainable? I don't care whether or not it's scientifically perfect. I want it to be what the script actually says. Thusly, 8 drivers potentially might have to make do with a politically friendly mixture, while their rivals get to play with the definitive article. It's the kind of thing that doesn't break the car, but it makes the car less itself at the exact moment the sport is reinventing itself. It's not running at its best, and if you want to be the leading light of this season, you need to be the best throughout. Yeah, Petronas will get their act together, they will get their fuel approved eventually, but if the reporting is accurate, they have left it absolutely fine and they were caught with their pants down. They surely did not expect this process would have taken this long to actually get through approval. Whereas their other suppliers, they've been actually get across the line a little earlier. Yeah, it was stressful, absolutely, but they've done it already, seemingly, reportedly. And I can imagine for Red Bull, their first year as a proper manufacturer team, having all of this done with ExxonMobil coming up with the goods as well as Ford doing the goods, this has been a huge sigh of relief for them. And I think there has to be a mind shift for us F1 fans as to what innovation will be defined as in this regulation cycle, because for decades now, we have really defined innovation with the stuff we can actually see, as in, we can take a look at the bodywork and go, oh, that looks absolutely handy. We can look at the suspension and go, oh, that's certainly different. And quite a lot of that is being aimed at Ferrari right now, because I've heard about tricked out flexi suspension. I've heard about that tiny little wing above the exhaust, pushing the exhaust. It's like a blown exhaust in a way for the new era, which teams may not be able to replicate anytime soon. That's the kind of stuff that is getting people's hearts racing, because we know how to react to that. We look at the Aston Martin and think, oh, that could be spicy, once they get their engine and gearbox together. But what's going on with the actual power unit is the stuff we actually can't see. We don't fully necessarily understand it. We can't actually see a definitive change unless it makes a bump in the bodywork. Therefore, we're not as excited about it, and we may be a little bit more resistant toward it. Or if there is something we can see, it might be a case of blink and you'll miss it, like that Ferrari ring. It's right at the back, it's tiny. The teams who get ahead might do it because their fuel partner nailed an assurance scheme early and their auditing chain is clean. It doesn't sound glamorous, I hear you. We want lap times to be great, not often acknowledging the importance of teams and their suppliers running a tight ship. After doing my work with that DHL video, I really started to gain a good understanding about what it takes to actually get these cars racing, the logistical side of things. It just leaves me with the impression that we need to praise both elements, as in the act of going racing and the race to get racing there in the first place. And that's why this Petronas bottleneck is a really curious chestnut. I just had to talk to you about it. There is a real chance that the first race of a brand new era begins with some teams driving the future and some teams driving a compromise with their real first quencher is stuck in some kind of Vogon-esque pit of checks and balances. It won't destroy their season outright, but in a regulation cycle where advantages could be microscopic and things that are imperceptible to the naked eye or are covered with bodywork, every single change and optimization you can get will count. Starting slightly compromised could change narratives before anyone realizes why, and by the time they do, it might be too late, or we might have moved on to the next narrative. So do keep an eye on this story, folks. And I would like you to keep an eye on this, video here, which I believe is the perfect follow-up after you watching this video to the end. I'll see you over there.